Good evening and welcome to this very short video in which I'm going to talk through the design and show you the build of my composting toilet for my Campervan to replace my chemical cassette toilet. And the particular aspect about this design is it aims to embrace the advantages of a composting loo, but the convenience of the cassette loo. And you'll see what I mean by that when we get into this a bit more. Now you can of course buy composting toilets, but they are so expensive. And I mean, you're getting also 800, 900 pounds on some of them. But also the problem I have here on my rig is because I'm replacing something, it's got to fit. And so I need to build something to go into a very small space. Okay, so now the idea of my loo, as I said, is that it embraces the advantage of the composting toilet with the convenience of the cassette loo in terms of swapping out the charges, but also removes some of the uck factor that some people have when they sort of have to discharge their composting toilet. Because let's be under no illusions, we do not compost in our toilets. We collect and it kicks off the composting process, but it is finished off in a composting bin or offline, and some people have a problem just emptying out the toilet into that. My design helps deal with that one. Okay, so for those of you who don't know how composting toilets work, basically you have a special designed toilet bowl that separates out the poo from the wee. And then you deal with it in two separate ways. Composting human manure requires nitrogen, which comes from the poo. It requires air, or oxygen really, and it also requires carbon. So you have to put in there a carbon medium. And most common ones are sawdust, sort of wood chip flakes, pet bedding, that sort of thing. Some people use peat, or some people use coconut coir. I don't like that because we don't grow coconut trees in our country, so I use wood chippings, and we'll have a look at that in the workshop when I show you the actual toilet. Okay, so the advantages of the composting loo is of course very environmentally friendly, no chemicals. And let's not kid ourselves, the green chemicals that we use these days, or the washing tablets, a little bit more friendly than the old formaldehyde based stuff, but it's their chemicals all the same. Composting loo doesn't use any water to flush away, which not only is environmentally friendly, but actually is quite a good asset on a camper van where we've got limited resources in any case. And the other thing is there's a long time between having to empty to discharge. I think I've probably got sort of like 20 days worth of single person use, maybe a bit more actually on my design before I have to change the charge. Now on my design, what I've done, as you'll see this, is I've designed the poo basket to be actually like a cassette. So when it's full up, I can take one out and put another one in. And the one I've taken out, the idea is I store it until I get back to base, and then I don't actually empty it into a composting bin. It goes down behind my shed and the composting takes place in that cassette. It just gets kept there for 9 months a year and the composting happens in there. So you haven't got all this emptying stuff. It's nice and slick. In fact, I would say it's better than the chemical cassette because although it's reasonably sort of slick, you've still got that whole emptying process, which is quite grim. So that's my design, and we're going to see that in a minute. The disadvantage of composting loos, of course, is that medium, that carbon medium, because it's quite bulky compared to, say, the concentrated chemicals you have on the cassette toilet. The other question is, does it smell? And I was surprised when I'd done my research on that. It seems that composting toilets do not smell because it's actually the water slushing around with the poo that brings off the smell. Once you put your carbon medium in, into the poo basket, and you put a bit in each time you have a deposit, you don't get the poo smell, which is great. So that's about it then. Let's take a walk into the workshop now and I'll show you what I've done. Right, we're in the workshop. Let's have a look at my composting toilet, and there's the nice soft close. So basically the actual box is made out of box section from Flowplast, and I needed a plasticky sort of material because it's effectively a wet room. It's a shower as well, but you can make these out of wood, and loads of people have. So I've got the chrome strip on there to match the wet room, as you saw in the first picture, and that little thing there is just an alert that it flashes when the wee bottle, the urine bottle, is getting a bit full. Okay, standard toilet seat, bought from Argos, black with sort of silvery glitter stuff in it. So you've got a soft close mechanism on it. Open it up and you can see inside my composting diverter. Got this from Strumpet and Trollope. They do an amazing range of designs. You go and have a look at their website. They're great people as well. You can interact with them. Loads of useful information on there. And I got the one with the Modesty bung. So you can just basically hide what you don't want to see. Obviously that's the solids. And that goes down there into the liquids. So if I take the seat off, it's all got a quick release, which is all jolly good. And then I can take the lid off, and then we can look inside to see my design. There we go, slide off hinges. Okay, so let's have a tour of my composting toilet. So main construction here. Here there's a platform, and on the platform sits the wee bucket. It's quite simply a 5 litre heavy duty container. It sits on the platform like so. But you'll see what I've done is I've inset into it a float level to trigger that getting full alarm. That just plugs into there like so. It comes off and I just store it there. Now there's an issue here, design issue. I don't know the way around it. I'll think about it. But when that container starts to get a bit full and I'm in my van jumping around, is the danger of it spilling. So basically when I'm travelling, that goes there on like that. Now the good thing is when that the lid with the diverter closes down, there's a tube that goes into the wee bottle. And of course it won't go in properly when that lid's on. So I'll know I'm not going to accidentally take a wee with the lid on. So there's no danger of an awful mess. Right, okay. Now my solids cassette. I'm using that word loosely, and I'll show you why I call it cassette. It's quite simply an 18 litre square bucket with a lid, and when I take this out to take it down the bottom of the garden for composting, I can put the lid on, but once it gets down there I've got a different sort of lid which I'll show you later. So this quite simply, the lid goes on the bottom of the box like that. The 18 litre bucket squeezes in nice and tight, pushes nice and tight against the wee bucket to stop everything moving around. And here I've got a little tube which goes to a fan, which I'll show you in a minute. And the idea is to bring plenty of air flowing over the poo to help the composting. If there is any little whiff, actually it goes out of the back through a carbon filter. Now, you know, I probably think this is a waste of time. I'm just a little bit of a nerd. I've read loads of people with composting toilets who haven't bothered putting a fan in. The posh ones you buy for £1,000, yeah, they've all got them in. But you know what? People say you don't need it. It's a waste of time. And they're probably right, but I've done one in any case. So that slots in like that. Okay. Now, when I'm doing this for real, inside that bucket, before I put it in, I'll put a composting liner, which is basically a bag that actually degrades once it starts to get a bit wet and moist after about 90 days. And so it composts with the actual human manure as well. But just to show you what I'm doing, I've left it out. And you put about an inch of your carbon media, we'll talk about that in a minute, in there as a bedding. And under the platform where the wee bottle sits on, there's room for a bag that contains a recharge. So I can start off with one charge. I've got a bag in there for a recharge. So that's like 2 months worth of travel time, that's if I was on the road full time. So that's fine. And then quite simply, let's take this lid off. That's in use mode. The thing slides back on again with the slide hinges, goes down, and that diverter there goes straight into that wee bucket. I've got actually a splash guard that sits on the top of there, but I'm leaving it off just to show you what's what. So, and then I can just simply drop on the... Oh, that was silly of me, wasn't it? Hey, outtake. There you go. Soft close, takes forever to close actually. but down she goes. So that's my composting toilet. Now the idea is, instead of taking that bucket out, take it down the garden and pouring everything into a composting container that you leave for about a year, because it's of course nothing's composting in the toilet, it just kicks the process off, but it takes about a year. What I'm hoping to do is just take it down the garden, put a different sort of lid on, a lid that's got air vents but that lets air in, and but no water, and then just put a fresh bucket in there. So it's like a cassette system. I'm hoping just it can compost down in its actual container, so I haven't got to start pouring stuff around. That's my little nuance to the design. And we'll take a quick look at the back. Okay, and that there is the carbon filter, and it's quite simply a B&Q consumable for cooker hobs. So you know, it's £7. You know, you can replace one of those every 3 months, will be fine. That's the plug-in to take to the power. And what will happen is the power will not only fire up the light, but it will fire up the fan as well. Now mine's on a timer, so I can just turn it on and then it will go on for about 3 or 4 minutes and then turn itself off. So that's how I've got mine set up. So, strumpet and trollop. Turn it around so you can have a look. So, strumpet and trollop diverter, Flowplast end box construction, all plastic, waterproof, a little bit of chrome trim, it's not really chrome, it's plastic, and a standard domestic soft close toilet from Argos. Overall cost, including the buckets, about 220 quid, I guess. Right, so for the composting process you need 3 things. You need nitrogen, which comes from the poo, you need oxygen, which comes from the air, and you need carbon. And there's various carbon mediums you can use for composting toilet, but I use pet bedding, which is effectively softened wood flakes. Comes from wood mills. It's just basically sort of like coarse sawdust, but I've added to that some actual very fine sawdust because I'm generating loads of it in my workshop. So that's what that is there, and I just keep that by my loo. Basically in there's about 10 days, 7 to 10 days worth of medium, depending how many deposits you make a day. So for each deposit, what you do is take the lid off, a couple of those into the composting toilet on top of your deposit, and then that will then very quickly mask the smell. Any smell that comes up through will be absorbed by the medium, and then that will just take the smell out, and it will start the composting process underway. So I've got about 10 days supply in there, but packed all around my loo. We go back to have a look down inside my loo. Okay, if you look down, you can see I've got Tupperware containers for the medium. Actually, this is microwave curry, so I'm recycling the containers. So each one of those is probably 2 days supply. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 there, plus the main one that you saw earlier on. I've probably got a month's worth of medium, because that's the disadvantage of composting toilets. With the old chemical toilets, you've got a very concentrated sort of chemical, haven't you? Whereas the medium's quite bulky, but I've managed to stuff it all around there. So all in all, with the charge, I've got a month's worth of activity, should we say, a continual month's worth of us boondocking off grid. I've got a second recharge under the pee bottle to recharge the bucket, and so I'm just going to keep in the van somewhere, probably in the footwell. If you look in my hacks channel, you'll see a little mod I've done for the passenger footwell, where there's both space, a little locker which will keep another month's worth in. I'm never going to be more than 2 months off grid without coming back to be able to sort things out. So yep, all jolly good, all jolly good. Trumpet and strollop diverter, go onto the website. By the way, no affiliate links here, there's no commission. You know, I just think they're a good product and a good bunch of people. Okay, so I hope you found that of use, and I managed to successfully get across my concept of the combined hybrid advantage of the composting loo and the convenience of the cassette loo. And on that basis, I just want to very briefly mention two things. One is the efficacy of the composting process in the cassette, and secondly, range anxiety. What happens when you start filling up? So where I am unsure is how well the composting will take place. So what I'm worried about is not enough critical mass of stuff, if you like, to get it going. Because what happens, it starts to compost, it generates a bit of heat, which then triggers off the next layer, etc., etc. So I had a chat with a guy at my gym. We call him Allotment Dave. He's all a bit of a tree hugger, into all this sort of stuff. He does composting. He doesn't seem to think it's going to be an issue, because basically what he says is composting, when things get a bit too cold, just stops. But once things warm up again, then it starts again. He says he thinks in little cassettes it'll stop sooner, but then it'll start sooner as well. And he did suggest that in the winter I start chucking blankets or an old duvet over the cassettes, that sort of thing. I want to try and avoid that because this has got to be a low hassle thing. And because they take up so little space, I've only got one down in the shed at the moment, behind the shed. I've got room for plenty more. I can afford to leave it longer, you know, rather than 9 months a year, I can leave it a year, 18 months, if need be, before I get all the good stuff to put onto the garden. So we'll have to see how it goes, and of course in a year's time I'll report back. Now, emptying. Now we've been focusing, of course, on the poo, the waste, because that's the critical one. But just let's talk about the wee bucket. What I found is, because I've used it just for the summer now, half the summer, I fill up that wee container in about 2 to 3 days, depending on how much I've had to drink and tea and that sort of stuff. Now, what do we do with this? Well, actually, what I found out, of course, is urine actually is also a very good fertiliser. It's 95% water, and the rest is mostly urea, and there's some minerals in there, phosphorus, potassium, all great stuff for the garden. If you've got hedging and trees and some sort of big hardy bushes, you just put it in neat. If you're going to use it on things like some sort of flowers and actually grass, they say to dilute it down. And it is a whole sort of range of geeky science around it on how much you dilute everything down by. But the reality is, of course, you're not going to come home within 2 to 3 days. I've got room for one spare bottle, but then what happens? Now, of course, look. People might say, well, if you can put it on your hedging at home and on trees and that, why can't you do it out in the wild? And in terms of environmental factors, yes, of course you can. Urine is sterile, it has no pathogens that faeces has. You can, in fact, drink your urine, and people have done that where they've been in difficulties. And of course, you go for a walk in the forest, you get caught, you go behind a tree every week, don't you? In the old days, we were in a tent at night, might have a pea in a cup and chuck it out onto the grass. So, and of course, animals are doing that all the time. So environmentally, it's no problem. But however, I am a little concerned, this is just my view, I'm not preaching here, about the perception the campervan community has out there. And if someone's to see you emptying a bucket or a 5-gallon container of something, which they don't know what, into the hedging, they might just think. So my view is, let's all be discreet about this. And of course, in towns, you can, of course, take it into a public loo, take some towels so you leave it cleaner than when you arrived, and that's a way to do it. So I'm not preaching, but I just think we need to be careful as a community on what image we give, even though we know it's perfectly all right. Okay, now, my cassette, I reckon, is going to last me 3 weeks to a month, and I've got 2 cassettes. So I'm almost always going to be able to get home to base without having to worry. If I was doing a long trip, there are some campsites around the UK where they have composting facilities for your loo, but not that many. So what happens if you're in an emergency where you cannot get back to base, you can't find a local campsite that has disposal facilities? What can you do? Well, what surprised me until I really thought about it and done a bit more reading is actually what you can do is bag it and bin it. Now, my initial reactions probably might be like yours, like, eek, I don't like that. But actually, as soon as I read more, of course, thousands and thousands of people are putting human waste in the general waste every day in the form of nappies and sanitary towels. Okay, in fact, what we're doing in the compost is actually much friendlier than that, because nappies have materials that won't compost down in landfill. They'll stay there for years and years and years, whereas what we've got will just compost down. So the important thing is, of course, you protect your bin then, the people who are disposing it. In my view, is if you have to do that, and my view, it's a last resort, you say triple bag it in these composting liners, three. It doesn't matter about the cost, to make sure it's well protected. If it's an emergency and you have to do it, bag it well, and then it's fine. It's going to landfill where it will carry on rotting. Or actually in Hampshire, in some parts of Hampshire, and I'm sure the other parts of the UK, it goes, where I live, it's burnt to produce electricity in a power station, and human feces has a high calorific value. So actually, the initial is ick. It's all actually not too bad, but of course we must protect those who have to remove it from us. Anyway, I'm not preaching, everyone can make up their own mind. So, hope this has been of use, and as I said, I'm going to sort of report back on how well the composting goes, and I'm going to actually put this onto the VanHacks channel rather than the CampervanConversion channel, because that's the one that's getting all the engagement at the moment, and people joining and subscribing, that sort of thing. And I'll put a link at the end of this video if you want to have a subscribe to that. Come back in a year's time to see how we're doing. But actually, all the signs are so far looking good.